The Truth About Goblins. Chapter 39. Annie sat up with a jolt. Had she heard something? Or was she imagining things? No, there was definitely someone in Kit's room. She sighed. What a relief. Even though he had said he wouldn't be too long, Kit hadn't returned for supper. Hours later, when it was time for bed, he still hadn't come back. Ophelia had expressed her concern, but Annie had assured her that he had probably got distracted by some other escapade, and that he was likely to return later in the evening. Of course, Annie had only half believed her own words. Kit had promised that he wasn't going to be gone longer than 2 hours, so he should have arrived long before everyone else had gone to bed. At least she knew he was back, judging by the noises from his room. Curious and restless, she decided to sneak over and see where he had been. But when she opened the door, she found that Kit hadn't returned at all. Instead, there were 2 members of the Black Raven's murder, clumsily crawling through the window on their way inside. They turned their attention to Annie as soon as she entered the room. "Hiya," said the girl, the one Kit had called Shady back in the forest. The boy was there too, still on the floor. Shady stooped down to help her brother to his feet. Annie stared at them, confused. Hi? I knows ya," said Shady. "The boss's friend, right? A friend of the fox." "Quiet," warned Annie, shutting the bedroom door. "People are sleeping. And if you're talking about Kit, then yes, I was with him in the caves, and you guys ambushed us in the woods." She noticed the nervous looks on their faces. "What's going on?" "It's about the boss," said the boy. "Something's happened to him." "What?" Annie's heart jumped to her throat. "What happened? Is he all right?" "He's kidnapped," said Shady. "Butterfingers here saws him hiding in the bushes when he got jumped." Annie stared at them again, disbelief written all over her face. "Are you sure?" There had to be some mistake. When did it happen?" Shady nudged her brother, who reluctantly replied, "An hour, maybe? I followed him back to see where's they went. That stranger's a slippery one, he is." "But he didn't shake you, did he?" urged Shady. "Nope," he said. "I can takes you to him right now." Annie was already searching for clothes. "That's exactly what we're gonna do. Let me get my shoes on and we're going." "You's coming alone?" said Shady. "Might not be a good idea." But Annie wasn't listening. She pulled out a set of Kit's clothes, unwilling to waste time in getting her own. Pulling on a pair of shoes 2 sizes too big, she tied up the laces and was ready to go within seconds. "Take me to him," she said. The 2 kids didn't hesitate. Out the window they went, with Annie at their heels. Being part of the murder, they took the little used pathways amongst the streets of the market, moving quickly through trees and bushes to hide from prying eyes. Not that there was anyone on the street at that time. Most goblins were in bed. But even as they took this roundabout way, Annie felt the direction was familiar. Her heart beat faster with each step. She hoped that this was some sort of prank, that Kit wasn't in any trouble at all and they would find him perfectly safe among friends. But as they approached their destination, her optimism faded. All hope vanished as the 2 orphans came to a halt. "There," the boy pointed straight ahead. "That's where he took 'em." Annie found herself face to face with Grimm's dreary tower. It was completely dark and uninviting as ever. "You have got to be kidding me." She stifled a groan, still crouched in the bushes. "Are you saying Grimm kidnapped Kit?" Saws it with my own eyes, said the boy. Pounced on him and dragged him back here, he did. Wasn't sure what to do about it, so Shady told me to come and get you. You did good, said Annie, in response to the boy's expectant gaze. I guess I'm going in. She rose from the bushes and approached the gloomy tower. What do you think you're doing? Cried Shady. You can't go in there alone. Are you offering? Said Annie. She was met with silence. Didn't think so. She stepped towards the door. If you're not going to help, then scram. Her heart sank just a little when she heard the kids skitter away. She had expected it, but the reality of facing Grim on her own was more unsettling than she had anticipated. Still, she didn't slow down on her way to the door. She gripped the handle with both hands and gave a tug. It didn't budge. She tried again but realized, with some embarrassment, that it was locked. More embarrassing still was the realization that she wasn't about to get in any other way, not with the windows boarded up and too high to reach. She needed help. Turning on her heel, she ran towards Main Street. Should she look for an arbiter? Maybe even go to the arbiter's tower? Would they believe her story? For some reason, she didn't feel like it would be the smartest thing to do. What if they broke in and found nothing? What if Grim had already taken Kit somewhere else? This last thought took Annie by surprise. It only made her run faster. She knew where she needed to go. Breathless, she arrived at Timothy's Teas. She pulled on the door, but the shop was locked up for the night. Stooping to the ground, she searched for some pebbles. Satisfied with the few she managed to scrape up, she took a step back and tossed them towards a second-floor window, hoping the constant tapping would alert someone inside. One stone hit its mark, another missed the window but hit the frame, and still another hit the glass. But it wasn't until the fourth throw that the window slid open. Annie didn't realize what was happening until she threw the fifth stone, which flew through the open window and hit something inside. Ouch! She gasped as Timothy emerged, rubbing his forehead irritably. Oh! She exclaimed. Sorry! Annie, he said, squinting into the darkness. Is that you? What are you doing here? She was about to reply when he shook his head and added, Never mind, I'll come down and open the door. She waited impatiently, watching the second floor come to life. Finally, the door to the shop opened. Come in, said Timothy, gesturing for her to enter. Is something wrong? Why are you up at this hour? He was still in his pajamas, holding a lantern. Saphira, also in her pajamas, was coming down the stairs behind him. Kit's been kidnapped, said Annie, stepping inside. Grim's got him. Timothy's face went white. What? You mean Mr. Grim? The magician in the tower? Saphira came to a halt next to him. You're not saying he... Yes, she cried. Are you absolutely certain? Said Timothy. Did you see it happen? Well, no, she admitted. But someone else did. I went over there to try and save him, but the door was locked. She looked from one to the other. I don't know what to do. He's been gone for hours. What if Grim's doing something to him? Timothy placed a hand on her shoulder. Are you absolutely sure that this happened? Yes, you have to believe me. She looked to Saphira in desperation. Tell him about the glasses. This time Saphira's face went white. Annie, no. What are you talking about? Timothy looked between them, frowning. Do you mean the glasses from the... Saphira grabbed her arm, but Annie pushed past her. Yes, the ones from the forest, the ones that kid stole off the killer. We know who they belong to. Annie, please. Saphira's eyes were wider than ever. We don't know that they... Tell me. Timothy grabbed Annie's shoulders. Who's this magician? The glasses, do they... They're his. Grim was in the forest. He killed that woman in the cabin. Her whole body started to shake. And now he has Kit. Timothy released her and headed for the stairs. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't stop a moment, sprinting to get his shoes and jacket. Saphira was at his heels, also rushing for her clothes. But she cast a quick glance back at Annie. Look what you've done! There were tears in her eyes. Just look at what you've done! There was no single word for how Annie felt. Terrible, yes, for telling Timothy about the glasses. Scared, of course, for Kit's sake. But there was something more than fear, a sort of dread, and at the same time, impatience. Each second was torture. And then Timothy came rushing down again, his hat and coat pulled over his pajamas. He didn't say a word before pushing past Annie and running out the door. Saphira was seconds behind him. Hurry! She cried. Oh, Annie, he's going to get hurt! They were both through the door within moments, tailing Timothy on the way to Grimm's tower. The two sprinted as fast as they could, but they couldn't keep up with his long strides. By the time they reached the tower, he was already at the door. What are you doing? Saphira skidded to a stop, watching him thrust a metal rod into the keyhole. You're not... Picking the lock, he muttered. But you can't break in, she exclaimed. What if someone sees? What if the arbiters... Shut up, he snapped. If you don't want anyone to see, then don't draw attention. Both she and Annie went silent. He took a deep breath and sighed. I'm sorry. He couldn't lift his gaze. Forgive me, I didn't mean... Another sigh. I'm sorry. He focused his attention back on the lock, removing his tools only when he heard the click of the handle. He jumped to his feet and pushed his way inside. Saphira hesitated, but Annie was right behind him, refusing to let the darkness of the tower intimidate her. It was hardly a minute before her eyes adjusted to the dim light, but a quick scan of the shop yielded nothing. No doors, no stairs. Where did he go? She said, searching for footprints. He went in here. I know he did. The last to enter, Saphira looked around the room. I don't like this. Her eyes came to rest on a sword in a black sheath hanging on the wall. We shouldn't be in here. Her words were lost on the other two while they searched for another passage. There's a door, muttered Timothy, waving his lantern around. There has to be a door. Annie turned her gaze to the ceiling. It was dark, but she saw the outline of some sort of passage overhead. Hey, is that... But Timothy was occupied elsewhere. He stood before a large shelf in the corner, his fingers wrapped around its edges. A gust of air brushed against his hand, stirring the dust on the floor as it swept past his feet. He gave the shelf a tug. The two girls gasped as it slid towards them. Timothy, you're brilliant! Saphira's eyes went wide as a hidden door came into view. How did you find it? Annie didn't wait for his answer. In less than a moment, her hands were on the handle and the door was wide open. Now unobstructed, the cold air rushed into the room. To everyone's surprise, they were confronted by a staircase leading down to the basement rather than the floors above. They stared a long while, saying nothing as their eyes followed the narrow steps down into the dark. Annie was the first to act. Brushing her fear aside, she took a bold step onto the stairs. But Timothy grabbed her shoulder. "Let me go first." She relented, following behind as he held the lantern before them. The passage down the stairs was tight, and it only got more cramped as they reached the bottom. The steps had led them to a dank underground corridor, the old stone walls slick with moisture. "Stay close," said Timothy. "Not like we have a choice," said Annie. They moved slowly through the dark tunnel, walking in single file as Timothy led the way. It seemed an eternity before the gloomy corridor finally opened up to a bigger space, though the sight of the cellar did little to lift their spirits. "Are you sure Kit's down here?" whispered Saphira. "This doesn't feel right." "None of it does," said Timothy, glancing over his shoulder. "We'll just have to see where this leads." Moving as quickly as they could, which wasn't quick at all, they made their way down the tunnel. At long last, the light from Timothy's lantern struck something other than mud and moist rock. Coming to the end of the passage, the three were met by an old staircase. Its steps were stone, but the railing was wood, and from where they stood, no one could see where it led. But it didn't take much imagination to guess. "That must lead all the way above ground," said Annie. Her voice began to shake. "He's taking Kit to the surface." She ran to the stairs and started climbing. Saphira followed. "Annie, wait! We can't just—" They stopped, all three of them silent. Had they imagined it, or had they heard something behind them? No one said a word. And then a door slammed in the distance. Timothy turned and ran. "Timothy!" Saphira left Annie and ran after him, back down the tunnel. "Timothy, wait!" Annie was off the stairs and close behind them. "He's going after Grim." This revelation only made her run faster. "Stop, Timothy! It's too dangerous!" Her voice was shrill, almost a scream. "Timothy, please!" The light from his lantern disappeared around the corner. Annie grabbed Saphira's arm and pulled her back. "Let go!" she cried. "We have to stop Timothy! He's going to—" But her voice trailed off into silence as she followed Annie's gaze. The two found themselves staring at an open door, one they had missed while making their way through the dark corridor just moments ago. There was a faint light from within. Saphira grasped Annie's hand. "Do you think—" "I'm going in." Without hesitating, she entered the room. The light was coming from a set of candles burning steadily at the opposite end of the room. They were on a table, next to a chair, next to a post that supported the raised ceiling in its center. But aside from the candles and old furniture, there was nothing. Nothing besides a mess of scattered belongings on the ground. And Kit. Sitting on the floor, his hands were fastened to the pole with a coil of rope straight above his head. There was a blindfold over his eyes, his head hanging to one side. The two girls gasped, but his head snapped to attention at the sound of their entry. "Annie?" he said. "Saphira?" "Kit!" They ran towards him, grabbing the ropes. "Hey!" He struggled to get his legs moving, but they wouldn't budge. "Get the blindfold first." Sorry. Annie stooped down and lifted it off, gasping again as she saw his sore, red eyes. "I'm fine," he said. "Just get me untied. I don't know when that guy's coming back." "It's too tight," said Saphira. I can't undo the knots. Well, duh, I've been pulling at them for hours. What do you expect? His eyes scanned the floor before him. Over there, Annie. Get my pocket knife. She grabbed the knife and was beside Saphira in an instant, cutting the rope as quickly as she could. Timothy's gone after him, she said, trying to offer some comfort. I don't think he's coming back. Grim or Timothy, said Saphira dismally. The ropes finally snapped, sending Kit's arms to the ground. Try as he might to move them, they only lay there, limp and pale from being tied above his head for so long. Annie knelt in front of him. Are you sure you're okay? He didn't hurt you, did he? I'm okay, he insisted, trying to move his legs a second time. He got to his knees before he started to sway. I'm fine, He fell into Annie's arms. She caught him and held him tight. Kit? Burying his face in her shoulder, he started to cry. I'm sorry, Annie. His shoulders shook with the sobs. My fireball. I couldn't get my fireball to work. There was a sound at the doorway as Timothy entered, worn down but still in one piece. Is everyone all right? We are now, said Saphira, relieved beyond words at his arrival. Speak for yourself, said Annie, patting Kit's back as the sobs began to subside. She gently pushed him away. Think you can stand? He nodded, his face streaked with tears. While Annie lifted him to his feet, Saphira turned her attention to Timothy, still standing in the doorway. Judging from the expression on his face, the chase had not been successful. Are you okay? She said. What happened? I'm sure you can guess what happened, he muttered. There was a raw scrape on the side of his cheek. You're hurt, she exclaimed, reaching towards him. How did you... He pushed her hand away, slipping past her. I'm fine. Let's worry about Kit for the time being. Reluctant, she followed, wondering how he had got that scrape. She hoped he wasn't hiding any more injuries without her knowing. Meanwhile, Annie had managed to help Kit stand. His legs wobbled like jelly, but they were firming up with every step. The drug, or whatever he had been injected with, was starting to wear off. Left on his own, Timothy stooped to the ground and started gathering Kit's things. It seemed that Grim had emptied his backpack onto the floor, leaving everything scattered across the room. Once Kit had recovered enough to stand on his own, Timothy handed him his sweater. Thanks, he said, pulling it over his head. It was still a struggle for him to move his arms, but he was recovering quickly. Here, said Timothy, holding out the rest. Reaching for the bundle, Kit stopped. His hand hovered over it, motionless. Timothy frowned. Is everything all right? Kit stood frozen, unsure of what to do. But the moment passed as he grabbed the rest of his things. I'm fine, he said. Just a little shook up, I guess. Annie took his backpack and held it open in front of him. Let's go back, she said. Let's get out of here. Yes, let's hurry, said Saphira, sliding one of Kit's arms around her shoulders. I don't want to be around in case Mr. Grimm decides to come back. He's not coming back, muttered Timothy. Saphira glanced at him, but said nothing. She would ask later. Back in the dark corridor, Kit asked, How did you find me? One of the kids from the murder saw you, said Annie. He told me, and I went and got Timothy and Saphira. He sounded like he might cry again. Thanks, you guys. Don't you worry, said Timothy. We're just glad you're safe. Although Saphira didn't doubt his sincerity, Timothy's reply had sounded half-hearted. Clearly, he was more upset than he was letting on. Regardless of their low spirits, everyone was relieved as they entered the shop on the first floor. The darkness of the cellar had been stifling, and as they left the dark basement and closed the door behind them, the shelf moved back into place, all on its own. The entrance to the cellar was hidden once again. Creepy, said Kit, ill at ease in the strange shop. Can we hurry up and go? Don't push yourself, warned Saphira, noticing the sword on the wall had vanished. You're already in rough shape. It was hardly a moment before they made it outside, back onto the empty street. Timothy went ahead and gestured for them to follow. You two can stay at our apartment for the night, he said. You'll be safe there. Kit looked up. But my mom... My place is closer, he insisted. We'll make sure she knows what happened. No, he said quickly, shaking his head. Don't tell her about this. Annie eyed him uncertainly. Kit, I don't want her to know. I don't want her to see me like this. His voice started shaking again. Please don't tell her what happened. His request was met with silence as they continued down the street, on their way back to the tea shop. They would discuss the whole incident later on. Getting inside was their priority. By the time they arrived back home, Kit had made a significant recovery, though his nerves were still a mess. He was restless and jumpy, his eyes wide open even though he was exhausted. Taking his seat on the couch in the living room, the girls followed, refusing to leave his side. And although he said nothing, it was clear he was grateful. Timothy had immediately gone to the kitchen, as usual, to prepare a pot of tea. Moving mechanically, he brought out 4 mugs and set them down on the table, returning a second time with a small pitcher of milk and the teapot. Saphira filled a mug and passed it to Kit. You can relax now, she said. It's all over. Whether or not he believed her, Kit took the mug and held it close, letting the heat of the drink warm his shaking hands. Annie placed a hand on his knee. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm not afraid, he said, his grip tightening around the mug. It's the drugs. They're making me all jittery. Pulling up a chair in front of the couch, Timothy finally took a seat. It's time for you to tell us what happened. Saphira was uneasy. Shouldn't we let him rest a bit longer? He needs more time to... I told you I'm fine. Irritated, he set the mug of tea back down on the table. Should I start from the beginning? Timothy nodded, hands clasped on his lap. I went out the alleyway, he began, trying to keep it casual. I left after the meeting was over, but there were meddlers, arbiters, on the street. I ended up turning around and running downtown. Wait, said Saphira. Why were you avoiding arbiters? Why did you have to go the other way? It looked like they were picking up transgressors, he said, ashamed. I didn't want to get caught. What did I tell you? Said Annie. You'll only get into trouble if you keep doing stuff like this. He sighed. Let's pretend that I already feel bad enough without you saying, I told you so, okay? She went silent and let him continue. I didn't see his face, he said. It was too blurry. I felt something pinch my neck. His hand went to where he had been injected. That's when I started freaking out, 'cause of the needle. Then I blacked out. And then, urged Timothy. And then I woke up, he said. But I can't remember when, and I couldn't see anything because of that darn blindfold. A stretch of silence followed. Annie leaned forward in her seat. Did he... She hesitated. Did he do anything to you? He took a deep breath, hands trembling once again. He gripped the edge of the couch. I thought he would, and he said he would if I didn't answer. Unable to meet her gaze, he kept his eyes on the ground. But no, he didn't hurt me or anything. His eyes wandered to the red rashes on his wrists. Although the whole being tied up thing wasn't exactly a picnic. I think I might have some lotion for that, said Saphira, getting to her feet. Don't bother, he said. I don't need any icky lotion. It'll take the redness away, she insisted, handing a bottle to Annie. Here, dab a little on each wrist and rub it in. Annie did as she was told, even though he tried to pull away. Hold still, she said. Stop being a baby. It's not being a baby I'm worried about, it's smelling like one. He winced as she dabbed a glob onto one wrist. He looked at her and frowned. Hey, is that my t-shirt? And your jeans. She spread the lotion on his other wrist. And shoes, too. I was in a rush. What did he want to know? Said Timothy, unwilling to wait. I need you to tell me what this man was asking you. Why did he abduct you? Kit hesitated. I'm not completely sure. I was still a little out of it, and sometimes I couldn't understand what he was asking me, and... Kit, said Saphira, sensing Timothy's impatience. What did Mr. Grimm want? Unable to meet their gaze, his eyes traveled back down to his feet. He asked me about the baby. A silence fell over the room. It was a long time before he spoke again. He wanted to know where Donovan was, he continued, his voice nearly a whisper. I told him I didn't know. I told him I didn't know anything, but he didn't believe me. He kept yelling at me. He kept threatening me and said that if I didn't tell him, he'd... He stopped, covering his face with his hands. I thought he was gonna... Saphira rubbed his back. It's all right now, Kit. You're safe. Nothing is going to happen to you. Annie was mortified. Oh, Kit! She leaned over and hugged him tight. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. Geesh, guys. He squirmed under all the attention. I'm fine. This time, at last, he meant it. But his answer had a strange effect on Timothy. He got to his feet, turning his back to the three as he looked out the window. Timothy? Saphira watched, confused. Are you all right? He didn't seem to hear her. How? He muttered. How could he do it? Right here. All along he was here. He shut his eyes, lost in his own thoughts. The tower, the gold. He stopped and stood to attention, staring out the window. The gold! Timothy! She grabbed his arm. What are you talking about? He stared at her, dazed, and he continued staring. It was a good long moment before he gathered his nerves. You two will stay here for the night, he said, turning to the couch. This magician who calls himself Grimm. He is no doubt the man who is after my child. In allowing you to help me, I have put you all in danger, but I intend to see that nothing else happens. He looked at each of them, resolute. To any of you. He made his way to the windows and locked them up tight. Keep to the main streets whenever you have to go out. And don't leave without letting me know beforehand." He stopped in front of the last window and looked out onto the street below. All this time he was here, but now he has nowhere to hide. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" exclaimed Saphira. "I'm going after him." "But it's dangerous." She grabbed his arm again and tried to hold him back. "You can't just go out and stop him." "But I will," he said, shaking her off. "This time he won't get away. Stay here and watch over the other two until I get back." "Let me come with you." "No." He turned, cupping her face in his hands. "I need you here, Saphira. I need to know you're here. I need to know you're safe. You have to be here when I get back." He sighed. "Saphira, I need you." Another glance towards the couch, a moment of hesitation. Saphira was still staring, hoping. "Stay here," he whispered. "Stay safe." And then he was gone. There was nothing she could do. Defeated, she locked the door and returned to the living room. "He'll be all right," said Annie. "He knows what he's doing." "Does he?" she said. "Does he really?" Kit looked towards the door. "He's more dangerous than he looks, that Timothy." "What do you mean?" she said. "Nothing." He stretched his arms out and yawned. "Boy, I'm beat. Being, kidnapped really takes it out of ya." Annie slapped his knee. "You make that joke again and I'll punch you. Do you know how scared we were?" "You were scared? Who was kidnapped, you or me?" He got to his feet and turned to Saphira. "So, where can I hit the hay? I'm pooped." "You can take Timothy's bed," she said, gesturing to his room. "He won't be back for a while, so it should be all right. Annie can share my bed. It's big enough." "Sounds good," he said, striding to the bedroom. "See you in the morning." He disappeared inside and closed the door behind him. "He's brushing it off like it's nothing," said Annie. "Doesn't he realize how serious this is?" "He's only being brave," said Saphira. She looked towards Timothy's room, shoulders slumped. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Try as she might to seem angry, a smirk tugged at the edge of her lips. "Typical goblin, eh?" Saphira offered a weary smile. "I guess we should get some sleep too," she said, though sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. "Yeah." She followed Saphira up the little staircase and into the loft on the 3rd floor. Her room was simple and bare compared to the rest of the apartment, though this didn't surprise Annie. Exhausted from all the excitement, they kicked off their shoes and crawled into bed. They should have fallen asleep the moment their heads hit the pillow, but the trials of the day haunted their thoughts and kept their eyes wide open. Annie lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. "Saphira?" She rolled over. "Yes." Annie hesitated. "You know how people in town call Grim Rumpelstiltskin? Like, as a sort of nickname?" "No." She ducked further under the covers. She hesitated again. "What if it's not just a nickname?" "Annie." I know. I guess I'm just paranoid or something. Can't stop thinking about that crystal of death stuff." Hearing something move under the covers, she felt Saphira grasp her hand. "Just sleep," she said. "Kit's safe now. We're all safe now." She didn't have the heart to mention Timothy. They said nothing more after that. But as Saphira rolled back over and yawned, Annie's mind refused to rest. She could only keep staring at the ceiling overhead. She thought about Grim and his drowsy dark eyes. She thought about Rumpelstiltskin and the black stone. She also thought about Timothy out on the streets, alone. And every so often, her mind would drift back to Kit. She sat up in bed as she heard the steps creak. "Who's there?" she whispered, careful not to wake Saphira. "It's just me." "Who's me?" "The Muffin Man, who do you think?" Kit entered the room and approached the bed. She relaxed and let out a sigh. "What's the Muffin Man doing in Saphira's bedroom?" He offered no reply. For the longest time, she thought he wouldn't answer. But eventually she heard a whisper from the dark. "Can I sleep here tonight?" Without so much as a word, she moved over, leaving a place for Kit to snuggle in beside her. He slipped under the covers without making a sound. His rhythmic breathing was comforting to hear. Calm, even. Just listening to it made Annie's eyelids feel heavy. Giving in to her fatigue, she relaxed and closed her eyes. And a moment later, the two of them were fast asleep. Hey, hi, I'm your narrator, Miranda Eastwood, also the author of The Truth About Goblins. If you liked this chapter, remember to add, follow, or subscribe to this channel so you can hear the next one. And if you didn't like this chapter, oh well, I can't really do anything about that. In any case, I just thought I'd let you know about my Patreon. You can check it out if you'd like to throw some support my way. It would mean a lot to me. Not to mention there's loads of extra exclusive content that I only post on Patreon. While I'm at it, I'll mention that The Truth About Goblins is now available as a complete audiobook, and you can get it wherever you get your audiobooks. Thanks for listening.